In our episodes, we discuss cases and topics that might be distressing or disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode. I, again, right off the bat, want to thank everyone for being here and taking the time to listen to any of the episodes that I put out. We've had a lot of new listeners in the last month or so, and I greatly appreciate each and every one of you. If you're interested in supporting the show, the best way to do that right now is just to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and also to leave a 5-star review on places like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That helps share the show so more people see it, and we can get more of these cold cases out. So maybe someone can hear something, and maybe they know something, and maybe the right tip can get to the right person. And again, you can follow us on social media, and if you have a case you want me to cover, or if you have a story that you yourself want to share, send me an email to cardinalcrimes@gmail.com, or send me a message on any one of our social media pages. The purpose I have in this podcast is to bring education and more meaningful discussions on prevention into the true crime space. And that's in addition to sharing cold cases that I think need more attention. I want this to be a place where people can share their stories. So if you have a story and you want to talk about it here on my podcast, send me an email. Or if you want, you can just send me your story and I can share it here anonymously. Either way, I think it's so important that we share stories and take the stigma away from talking about it out loud. I think we have so much we can learn from each other. So thank you so much again. And now let's get into our case today. Today, we're going to be talking about the unsolved murder of Tammy Zywicki. She was a student who went to college in Grinnell, Iowa, though she was from New Jersey. And I will say this is one of the most difficult cases I've researched just because of the amount of states the case kind of goes through and the sheer amount of articles on this case in general. So let's get started. On Monday morning, August 24th, 1992, Joanne and Hank Zywicki began to worry. Their 21-year-old daughter, Tammy, was on her way back to Grinnell College in Grinnell, Iowa, and would normally call to let them know she'd arrived safely, but they hadn't heard from her. Joanne and Hank Zywicki lived in Marlton, New Jersey, and Tammy and one of their 3 sons, Darren, had been back living there for the summer, but Tammy and Darren started a long road trip heading west. That Sunday, August 23rd, Tammy dropped Darren off in Evanston, Illinois, where he was a sophomore at Northwestern University. And around 1 p.m. that day, she started the drive to Grinnell College. When taking I-80, it maps today as a 4-hour and 45-minute drive. Tammy Zywicki was majoring in art history and Spanish and was about to start her senior year of college. And she actually only had about 2 weeks to be in Grinnell before starting an internship at the Art Institute in Chicago. Now, she would have gotten to Grinnell Sunday evening, and when she didn't call that evening to let her parents know she'd arrived safely, they didn't actually get too concerned yet. They said in an interview with People magazine, quote, "We thought she probably met up with friends and it got too late to call." But by Monday morning, when they still hadn't heard from her, they began to believe something was wrong. It was out of character for her. It wasn't like her to not check in with them. Tammy's parents began trying to track her down. They called Darren, but he hasn't seen or heard from her since she left. They called her friends at Grinnell, but none had seen her. One even wrote on a message board outside of Tammy's dorm, quote, "Z, where have you been? Your mom's having a cow." At some point, Tammy's parents began calling police stations in all of the districts and counties from Grinnell back to Evanston, trying to figure out if there was anything. They learned after calling one of the districts in Illinois that Tammy's car had been towed. So that Monday evening, after there was still no word from her, Tammy's parents file a missing person report with the Illinois State Police, and the two fly into Chicago on Tuesday and head to the LaSalle State Police Station to help with the search. Now first, I assume, they start to retrace Tammy's last steps. Darren said in an interview published in the Courier-Post on August 26, 1992, that the two had left their Marlton, New Jersey home together Saturday morning, so that would have been August 22nd, and they drove to Chicago, arriving in the evening. Now, this would have been a really long drive, like 11 and a half to almost 14 hours, depending on the route you take. So when they get to Chicago, which is pretty close to Evanston, they stay the night. And the next day, Tammy left to head to Grinnell at 1 p.m. in her white 1985 Pontiac hatchback. Now, at 5:05 p.m. on Sunday, August 23rd, just a few hours after Tammy left Evanston, before anyone was worried about her, state police found her vehicle along I-80, just 2 miles east of Utica. Police at the time just gave the vehicle a ticket for being abandoned. But the next day, Monday, August 24th, still before Tammy's mother officially reported her missing, but probably while they were calling all of her friends, her vehicle was still there, and state police had it towed at 2 p.m. Police said that her car was locked. There were no keys in the vehicle, clothing and luggage were in the car, but that there was no sign of foul play and that nothing had been taken or disturbed in the car. Now, there have been some conflicting reports on what items of Tammy's were found in the vehicle and what has been missing. At the time, local news didn't mention if her purse was in there, but an article in People magazine the following year said Tammy's leather bag, money, credit cards, and a Canon EOS camera were all missing. The FBI's page on Tammy Zywicki also writes that she wore a musical watch that had an umbrella on it and would play the song "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head," and that this watch was also missing. Once the connection is made after Tammy is reported missing that this vehicle belongs to her, state police and a canine unit start searching the area near I-80 between Utica and Ottawa, Illinois, and at some point a helicopter also comes in to aid in the search. Where the car was abandoned was about 2 hours southwest of Evanston, Illinois, so you can start to see the route that she was taking back to Grinnell, which appeared to be taking I-80 the entire way. On Wednesday, August 26th, the search area expanded. Illinois State Police Trooper Jerry Myers was quoted as saying, "We found nothing and were certainly hoping anyone with information about this young woman would come forward." Myers went on to say that the case is being treated as one of a missing person, but that there was no evidence of foul play. Though he referenced another missing person case from Illinois where they later discovered the individual had run away voluntarily. And he said that they didn't think that that was the case here. So no foul play, but not a runaway situation. So my assumption is at the time, maybe they thought that her car had broken down and maybe she started walking somewhere and maybe got into an accident or something. Tammy's parents were adamant that she would not run away. Joanne Zywicki said Tammy had no reason to. Tammy was looking forward to being back at Grinnell for a few weeks and then starting her internship in Chicago. Joanne added, quote, "If she had decided to do anything, she would have taken her money with her. She's excited about things in her life, excited about this program in Chicago. She's not the type to leave without anyone knowing, not any of her friends. Our family is not complete without her. We're a family of 6, 3 boys and 1 girl. We just need her back with our family and we want her back. We don't care about the person if he or she gives her back to us," unquote. Now, this is another instance of kind of those conflicting reports. Joanne Zywicki said that if she was going to run away, she would take the money with her. But there were also other reports, right, like I mentioned, that said that her money was missing, which might insinuate that she did take it with her. So it's just another one of those confusing things that come up in the research of this case. But regarding also what Joanne Zywicki said, at this point, that quote was published in an article in the Streeter, Illinois Times Press on Thursday, August 27th. And so she says, "We don't care about the person if he or she gives her back to us." So at this point, on the 27th, her family believes someone has taken her. Police haven't used language like this at this moment, but her family has a bad feeling already. As news of Tammy's disappearance spreads, witnesses do start to come forward with some crucial pieces of information. One witness said around 3 p.m. on Sunday, just hours before police would ticket the vehicle for being abandoned, they saw Tammy peering under the hood of her car, which was pulled over on I-80. And this tracks because Darren, Tammy's brother, said that on their road trip west, Tammy's car began to have some troubles, engine and brake issues specifically. Darren recalled that on their drive through Indiana, the car stalled a few times. He said, quote, "The engine would just decelerate, the oil light would flicker, and then, when you'd pull over, the engine would shut off. After the next 2 stalls, I added oil and water, and it ran fine." Darren said the morning before Tammy left, he checked the engine again, but everything seemed fine. He told her that if it seemed to be having those same issues again, to just stop somewhere like a rest area and wait until the engine cooled. By Thursday, the search had expanded from just around the car to up and down the interstate and up to Chicago. Missing person flyers were put up in truck stops, and Tammy's friends from college, shocked at the news of her disappearance, joined the search efforts. Over 50 students and some who didn't even know her had gathered to organize their own search, driving around neighborhoods in Iowa and Illinois, helping to distribute posters. Police said that a lot of tips were coming in, and there were multiple individuals who had reported seeing Tammy looking under the hood of her car where it was abandoned on I-80. And some also reported seeing a semi-truck at some point pulled over, with the driver appearing to be helping her. But Darren said in an interview that Tammy was pretty streetwise and that he didn't think she would have gotten in the car with anyone, even someone offering to help her. But the tip of an apparent truck driver was probably the best lead that investigators had at that point. This person was likely the last person to see Tammy, and they needed to find out who it was. So on Monday, August 31st, investigators announced to the public that they were looking for a, quote, white 5-axle semi-tractor trailer with 2 brownish diagonal stripes on both the tractor and the trailer. The truck also apparently had a logo on it, but the specific logo wasn't able to be identified. Witnesses said they saw the truck and its driver near mile marker 83 on I-80 between 3 and 4 p.m., just an hour before police would ticket the car for being abandoned. Witnesses described the man as being white, 6 feet tall, with bushy dark hair, and that he appeared to be talking to Tammy. Some said the two were standing by her car, checking something under the hood. Police Lieutenant Harold Bernadello said, quote, "He's the last person we know who may have talked to her. He's not a suspect. We just want to talk to him." The search efforts continued to grow, and so did awareness of Tammy's disappearance. People as far as Vermont and Georgia were helping with the search efforts, posting flyers and posters all over. Tammy's brother Todd, a law student at the time, said even the Clinton Gore presidential bus tour was aiding in the search to spread awareness. But there was still no sign of Tammy. 9 days after Tammy disappeared, 500 miles southwest of where her car was abandoned, near Joplin, Missouri, a 37-year-old hot tub installer named Lonnie was driving his pickup on I-44. He was driving when it started to rain, and he pulled over on the side of the highway because he had tools in the back of his pickup and he didn't want them to get wet. So he got out to either cover them or bring them inside, but when he was getting back in the car, he said he could smell an odor. Lonnie looked in the grass and saw a blanket, and he said just by the shape of it, he could tell it was a body. Lonnie drove to a nearby highway patrol station to report what he saw. He returned with a police officer, and they made a small cut in the blanket and saw a human leg. The body, which was lying 14 feet from the pavement in a grassy slope, had been wrapped in a white twin-size sheet and a dull red blanket with silver duct tape closing off both ends. Another article writes, quote, "The body was found on the north side of the westbound on-ramp, about 150 feet north of the roadway." I have not seen like a diagram or anything that shows exactly where it was found in relation to the road, and some of the descriptions are confusing, but that's what the articles say. The remains were transported and the scene was closed off for processing. The Lawrence County coroner, Dan Lakin, performed an initial examination of the body and reported, quote, "It appeared to be a white female, approximately 16 to 24 years of age. She was fully clothed in a blue t-shirt with Eastside Eagles Soccer 1989 printed in white lettering on the front. She also had a pair of faded blue cutoff sweatpants, athletic socks, but no shoes." He reported that 7 puncture wounds, made by an instrument no more than half an inch wide, were found in her upper chest. Her lungs, liver, and pericardial sac around the heart had been punctured, in addition to her right bicep. She died from internal bleeding. There was a bruise-like discoloration on the right side of her neck. None of her fingernails were broken, and she didn't appear to have been beaten. Lakin guessed the body, which was badly decomposed, had been outside in the heat for 4 or 5 days. He did remark, though, that she didn't appear to have any blood, just body fluids on the sheet and blanket from decomposition. The rate of decomposition also made it impossible to determine her eye color. Investigators believed the murder had taken place elsewhere and her body dumped in this location. Now, after the public learned of these remains being found, Lawrence County, Missouri received calls from all over the U.S. of people trying to identify who the body belonged to. And theZywickis were aware of this finding, but they held out hope that it wasn't Tammy. For one, the remains were so far from where her vehicle was last found, and the description of what she was wearing didn't match what Darren last remembered seeing her in. They also received more information about the undergarments on the victim's body. They were described as lacy panties and a frilly, flesh-colored brassiere with the word love embroidered between the cups. According to the People's Magazine article, this wasn't the type of underwear Tammy wore, though I'm not sure how that was confirmed. I can't imagine her parents really knew that information, or if maybe they guessed because she was more athletic. Or perhaps they compared it to her other undergarments she had in her possession at the time. Additionally, the victim was described as having auburn hair, and Tammy was blonde. But as they received more information, the realization was setting in that these remains were their daughter, Tammy. The t-shirt found on the body matched her high school soccer team, and the patches on the cutoff sweatpants were from 2 other teams she had played for. Joanne and Hank Zywicki had made their way back home to Marlton, New Jersey by this point, and they told reporters from the porch of their home, quote, "We don't want to talk about it anymore. We're trying to be as calm as we can." But on Thursday, September 3rd, the family received a call from police confirming what they hoped wasn't true. The remains had been identified as Tammy through dental records. She had been murdered. It was hard to know, because of the rate of decomposition, when exactly she had been killed. An official autopsy report released later on confirmed she had been sexually assaulted. Regarding the hair color initially being reported as being auburn, I've seen in some articles speculation that perhaps the red color of the blanket she was wrapped in had somehow stained her hair color. But so far in my research, I haven't gotten a clear answer on that, but it has never been suggested that her hair color was dyed. In my research, I couldn't really find any information on the state of the crime scene, like whether or not additional evidence had been recovered, but I did learn later that DNA was collected from semen on her clothing, which we will talk about later. One thing I did know in an article published shortly after the identification of the remains was that authorities were declining to say whether or not Tammy's purse, car keys, and camera were recovered. If you remember, those items were missing from her vehicle, and they didn't say if those items had been recovered or not. This article didn't mention anything about her musical watch either. The Zywicki's attended a mass on Tuesday, September 8th in West Newton, Pennsylvania, while Tammy's body was buried at the West Newton Memorial Cemetery. They chose not to watch the burial or see her body to spare themselves from the image. While theZywickis were dealing with the worst thing that could happen to a family, her case started to receive even more attention. This was really prompted by America's Most Wanted airing an announcement of her disappearance and description of the semi, which brought in a ton of tips. The tips were coming in, and the investigation had greatly expanded. There were 14 Illinois State Police investigators now working with authorities in Missouri, and because her death involved an abduction across state lines, the FBI was also involved. As the tips came in, there were over 60 witnesses who drove by and reported seeing Tammy on the side of the road and various descriptions of a man who had stopped to help her. But no one ever came forward and said that they were this person who stopped to help. And now, there were also leads that placed Tammy elsewhere. There was a motel clerk in Mendota, Illinois, just 15 miles north of where her vehicle was abandoned, who said that a woman resembling Tammy came to the motel by herself and asked about room rates. The girl said she was driving to her college in Iowa when the car broke down on I-80 and that a trucker outside was giving her a ride to Wisconsin to visit a boyfriend. According to the People magazine article, police did believe the clerk's sincerity. Like, they didn't think she was just making up some random story, but they were never able to track down a Wisconsin boyfriend. And apparently they couldn't corroborate the clerk's story. In the article, police describe this as another dead end, but this seems to me to be something very important. I mean, the motel was very close to where her vehicle was found abandoned, and the clerk said the girl was alone, and that the girl told her she was heading back to Iowa for college, and that a trucker had brought her there. I have so many questions about this encounter, but I literally couldn't find another article talking about this aside from when it was mentioned in the 1993 People magazine piece. Weeks go by and there are no breaks in the case. Tips come in, leads are followed up on, but investigators are nowhere closer to knowing who did this to Tammy, nowhere closer to arresting anyone. The Zywicki sons go back to school, and while Hank Zywicki returned to his job, he and Joanne continued speaking to the media, hoping that the continued exposure would bring in tips. Joanne and Hank actually appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show, and the episode focused on the murder of women on highways. Vigils were held, rewards up to $100,000 were announced for information leading to the arrest of her killer, and the Zywicki set up a scholarship at Grinnell in Tammy's name. Tammy's parents also met with a local private detective, the former Grinnell police chief Jim Ahrens, who volunteered to help with the case. But still, there was nothing. By spring of 1993, there were no new leads, and the investigation team in Illinois had been cut back from 14 to just 2 investigators. Joanne Zywicki started giving talks at colleges to students. She wanted to spread awareness, have something good come of this. The Zywicki's met with a psychic, of which they were mildly skeptical, but what could it hurt? The psychic saw a man with a slender build, 32 to 40 years old, a high forehead, bulging brown eyes, long hair, Caucasian. The psychic said she saw Tammy in the truck cab, the sheet and red blanket in the sleeper compartment, the rape and stabbing, and talked about a farmhouse that hid the truck. A year went by, and the Zywicki said in an interview with People magazine that they had lost hope in the investigation. Joanne said, quote, "Still no results from the investigation, but what can you do? I have no faith in the FBI or police." She mentioned specifically the loss of possible evidence. Apparently, witnesses at a gas station near where Tammy's body was found had reported seeing a truck and a trucker. Police, who initially said they had collected receipts from that gas station, actually never did, and the receipts were thrown away. Police said it was an oversight, saying they were stretched too thin. Now, throughout all this time, the leading theory was that a truck driver had abducted her, probably based on the sightings of a truck and the distance between where her car was abandoned and where her remains were found. Ahrens believes that whoever was responsible for Tammy's murder may be responsible for others in the area. And a lot of reporting from this time period talked about this. One article in the Des Moines Register, published on September 5th, 1992, said the trucking industry was really having to counter publicity that they said had been reflecting badly on the business. Scott Weiser, President of the Iowa Motor Truck Association in Des Moines at the time said that if any trucker was involved, the industry would do whatever it took to find them. They said no stone will be unturned. FBI spokesman Robert Long said agents had been receiving significant support from truckers, that one of their biggest sources of information had been from the drivers themselves. A cashier at a truck stop in Altoona, Iowa, said that the truckers had been talking nonstop about Tammy's murder, talking about what happened and what could be done. And troopers in several states had started pulling over trucks that matched the description, which was, if you remember, a 5-axle semi-trailer truck with a white background and brownish diagonal stripes across the cab and trailer. And again, there was a company logo on the stripes, but it's unclear what the logo was. Over the years, various truckers have been investigated. In 2007, a man named Bruce Mendenhall was arrested. He was a trucker and suspected of shooting women in Tennessee, Indiana, and Alabama. In these cases, it looks like the victims' heads were wrapped in plastic and duct tape. Mendenhall had been a trucker for 20 years, and authorities say he would prey on prostitutes at truck stops. Investigators did look into him as a suspect, and there was apparently one woman he murdered who he had abducted in a roadside situation, so very similar to what happened to Tammy, but they never ended up charging him. In 2020, a man named Clark Perry Baldwin, also a trucker, was looked at as a possible suspect too. He was arrested and charged in 2020 after DNA evidence linked him to the murder of 3 women in the 90s. According to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, Baldwin was charged with 2 counts of murder in the 1991 killing of Pamela McCall, who was a 32-year-old pregnant woman from Virginia. He was also charged in Wyoming in the deaths of 2 women whose bodies were found in 1992. As of the NBC article in 2020, those 2 women hadn't yet been identified. But very quickly, authorities came out and said Baldwin didn't appear to be involved in Tammy's death, but I couldn't find anything elaborating as to their reason as to why they eliminated him as a suspect. Now, another possible suspect who was investigated early on is Lonnie Bierbrot, not to be confused with the man named Lonnie who found Tammy's remains. That is a different Lonnie. Now, his name didn't appear in the articles I researched in the case until 2012, though he absolutely could have been named sooner. There are literally thousands of articles on this case over multiple states, so I definitely could have missed something. But Lonnie Bierbrot's name comes up a lot in articles published in 2012, 2014, and 2015. And he's brought up mainly by a retired Illinois State Master Sergeant named Martin McCarthy, who was demanding answers as to why Bierbrot was ruled out as a suspect and petitioning authorities to take another look at him. So the following is a summary of the information from those 2012, 14, and 15 articles, and those are all listed in the sources in the description of this episode. So Lonnie Bierbrot was originally put on investigators' radar when, during one of the original task forces established to investigate Tammy's murder in 1992 and 1993, when a nurse called in a tip. And this nurse said that she drove by Tammy's car on the afternoon of the abduction and saw a man standing with her outside. And this checks with what we know from many other witness statements. McCarthy says that in the files, an investigator put a star next to her name, but no one called her back. And maybe they didn't because they had received similar tips. I don't know what their process was. But months later, this same nurse said that a man who looked like the man she saw next to Tammy's vehicle came into the LaSalle County Health Department where she was working with his wife, and that the wife was getting some blood work done. Now, at some point while the two are there, the wife starts talking about this new watch that she got from her husband. And it was a watch that played the song, "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." It matched the description of the watch Tammy was said to have been wearing when she vanished. The nurse called the task force again, and she was finally interviewed, and her information led to Lonnie Bierbrot, who had been previously convicted of armed robbery and had been on parole since 1990. You also have it reported that Lonnie Bierbrot was a LaSalle County native. He was from the area where Tammy went missing, and he had family still living in the area. But he lived in Missouri, where Tammy's body was found. He was also a trucker, which matches the prevailing theory investigators had as to who murdered her. So investigators received this tip from police. They track down Lonnie and they interview him. And now this is where in my research I became very confused because there are two contradicting statements. An article by Lee Rood published on May 11th, 2014 in the Des Moines Sunday Register says, quote, Bierbrot, a LaSalle County native, confirmed to investigators that he'd been there, minutes from the spot on I-80 where Zywicki was last seen, on the day of the abduction. His brothers and mother lived in the Peru, Illinois area, and he'd been trying to find a job. But an article by Lynn Riddle, published on January 26, 2015 in the Des Moines Register, says investigators also interviewed Lonnie's wife, and that his wife said, Lonnie was with me in Missouri at the time of the abduction and murder. To read directly from the article, quote, Bierbrot was identified by a nurse in LaSalle as being the person she saw with Tammy on the day Tammy disappeared. The nurse was on I-80 returning with her children from McDonald's. She named Bierbrot after he and his wife came into the clinic where she worked. Bierbrot was questioned by police and released. When he was questioned, his wife said he was with her in Missouri at the time of the abduction and murder. So, we appear to have two different stories here. And now, these are just snippets of interviews being relayed by McCarthy decades later. I have submitted a public records request to try and get what I can on these interviews to get more clarity, but really to verify if Lonnie and his wife really did give two contradicting statements as to where they were the day of the abduction. And I've never seen in the reporting anything about Lonnie and his wife giving contradictory statements, but the articles at the time are contradicting. So there's something we need to figure out here. McCarthy added that apparently investigators didn't get much when they interviewed him because he seemed, quote, demented. And the nurse who had called in that tip apparently told McCarthy that at some point after he was questioned, Lonnie and his brother showed up at her place of work asking how police got his name. And she was scared, rightfully so. Beyond that, though, it's written in these articles that Lonnie sold his truck days after Tammy went missing, and that police actually did track it down and search it, but there's no information on if anything was found in it. Additionally, it's reported that the truck Lonnie drove was a Kenworth truck, and that there was a Kenworth logo on the blanket Tammy's remains were found in. But regarding this logo on the blanket, I have not seen anything to corroborate that. And there was no mention of a logo being on the blanket until these articles. So, investigators do get DNA swabs from Lonnie, and he actually died in 2002. But in 2012, it seems as though investigators were re-looking at leads because they tracked down his ex-wife to Florida, but she wouldn't talk with them and insisted Lonnie had nothing to do with Tammy's murder. Now, McCarthy says he believes investigators gave up on investigating Bierbrot as a lead once his ex-wife refused to cooperate. And regarding the DNA, in these articles is where I learned that a semen sample was found on Tammy's clothing, and an FBI special agent who in 2014 was in charge of Chicago's field office said that that DNA was tested, quote, again in 2004, but that what was collected was too poor of quality and too small. He said, quote, it wasn't enough to solve the case simply through science. This special agent told a Chicago Tribune columnist that a, quote, circle of evidence pointed to one suspect, but he couldn't get the circle into a noose. Who that one suspect is, I do not know. It was mentioned in the same article where they were talking about Lonnie Bierbrot, but they don't confirm for sure if that is the one suspect. Lee Rood, who wrote a lot of these articles I'm using for this section on Lonnie, said a contact with the FBI couldn't confirm the accuracy of McCarthy's description of the witness statements provided to law enforcement, and they wouldn't comment on McCarthy's questions. She just insisted that all of the leads had been thoroughly run down. Rood also spoke with a defense lawyer who said what McCarthy was asking for, which was for a grand jury to look at the evidence against Bierbrot, was a long shot. That he had never heard of a prosecutor calling a grand jury to hear evidence against someone who can't be indicted. He said, quote, "You can't charge a corpse." I think with all of this, Lonnie Bierbrot is someone absolutely worth investigating. I mean, what are the chances that he is from where she went missing, but lived where her body was found? Then there is the nurse's tip regarding the watch, seeing a man who looked like him. It's all a lot. But the majority of this information is coming from the retired Illinois Master Sergeant Martin McCarthy. So I don't have anything to verify what he is saying. I don't think that he is lying, but it's his memory decades later. Once again, I have submitted a public records request to see if I can verify any of what he's saying, but who knows if they'll actually get me anything back. Believe me, if they do, you guys will be the first to know. I have read in places like the Who Killed Tammy Zywicki Facebook page that Lonnie was ruled out with a lie detector test, which I haven't seen confirmed in either way. I've mentioned before, the ruling out of suspects with lie detector tests is such a flawed practice that we see so much of in these older investigations that I would hope if they ruled out anyone with a lie detector, that they are re-looking at those individuals, because lie detectors are notoriously unreliable. In 2015, the Illinois State Police turned to the Vidocq Society, a group of investigators who help with cold cases, and they wanted them to look at Zywicki's case. At the time, this surprised Joanne Zywicki, who had been critical of the investigation, but she was heartened by the news. Though she also expressed frustration in why police weren't continuing to look into Lonnie Bierbrot, and said they had a duty to say why they excluded him. And regarding this Vidocq Society review of the case, I have never seen if anything actually came of that. Now, I mentioned earlier about police failing to get receipts at a gas station near where Tammy's body was found. Well, thanks to the Who Killed Tammy Zywicki Facebook group, I did find the article that has more information on this. This article comes from the Springfield News Leader and is dated Sunday, August 8th, 1993. The gas station in question was a truck stop near Sarcoxie, Missouri, and apparently Ahrens, the volunteer private investigator for the Zwickis, he tracked down a man described as 6 foot 3 inches tall, 230 to 240 pounds, with black medium-length hair, brown eyes, and a dark complexion, either a darker-skinned Caucasian man or possibly a Latino man. Ahrens said he interviewed 2 witnesses at this truck stop who said this trucker, who drove a similar truck to the one described by investigators, would stare at young women in the truck stop and would make them feel uncomfortable. They said after the murder, he would stare in the direction of where her body was found. The trucker was seen using a Comcheck credit card that had the letters GEES on it and would usually come in on the weekends. Ahrens believed this trucker used the Sarcoxie truck stop somewhat frequently, but then stopped in March of 1993. Nothing apparently ever came of this lead, and I don't know, with it, you'd think if he came in somewhat frequently, it would have been easy to track his name down, but I saw nothing else about that. Another potential suspect is Lonnie Spells. And once again, this is a different Lonnie than the Lonnie Bierbrot we just talked about, and different than the Lonnie who found Tammy's remains. Lonnie Spells was a 30-year-old truck driver from Ohio who was arrested for the murder of a woman named Geneva LaVon Davis, a 26-year-old sex worker from Memphis, Tennessee. He was arrested on Thursday, August 27, 1992, in Columbus, Ohio, after someone informed authorities that Spells had killed Davis in Memphis, then dumped her body along Interstate 30 near Greenville, Texas, on August 2nd. Her body was discovered on August 10th, which was apparently the same day that this informant came forward. Now, Lonnie Spells used to live in St. Louis, Missouri with a woman and their daughter, but the two moved to Columbus because they had relatives who lived in the area. After Lonnie Spells was arrested, his name was brought to the attention of Licking County, Ohio Sheriff Jerry Billy, who was the commander of an interstate homicide task force, which at the time was investigating the deaths of 8 women along Ohio highways, as well as murders in Alabama, Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Mississippi, New York, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. I don't believe Tammy was ever included in that specific investigation, as the articles where it mentions that task force came out just a few days after her abduction, but still before her remains had been discovered. But I mean, timeline-wise, it is possible that Lonnie Spells had something to do with it. He was arrested on August 27th in Ohio, and Tammy was last seen on August 23rd in Illinois. So he would have had to have driven from Illinois, where her car was discovered, to where her body was discovered in Missouri, which would have been about an 8-hour drive, and then get to Columbus, Ohio, a 10-hour drive, but over the course of 4 days. So that's definitely doable. But from what I understand, most of the women linked to Lonnie Spells were sex workers. So it would be a departure from his usual MO to target someone like Tammy, but it is possible. Additionally, Lonnie Spells is black, and in his photo published in news articles at the time, he had short black hair. The man that many witnesses saw helping Tammy at her vehicle, if you believe that that is her killer, was described as Caucasian, possibly Latino, with long dark hair. With Lonnie Spells, what I haven't found in my research is a timeline of where he was known to be during that time frame. And really, I think I might eventually do a completely separate episode just covering him, just because of how many murders he was under investigation for. Over the years, there has been a lot of speculation and theories as to others potentially involved in her death, but no one has ever been charged. Tammy's father, Hank, died in 2015, and her mother, Joanne, passed away in May of 2025, neither getting answers as to who killed their daughter. The murder weapon has never been found. No one knows for sure where the murder took place. Some wonder why Tammy was wearing clothes that were different from what her brother last saw her in. There's so much we don't know, but someone has to know something. Again, I don't share these stories for entertainment. I share stories like this, so maybe, just maybe, someone out there remembers something. Maybe you know someone who was a trucker in the 90s who often drove on a route similar to the one Tammy was on. Do they remember something? Did they meet another trucker and get a weird vibe? Do you know someone who had a weird obsession with this case or got agitated when they heard news about it? Or has someone told you something and you've been too afraid to speak out about it? It's time to share any information you have. According to the FBI's page on Tammy Zywicki's murder, some of her items are still missing. This includes a Canon 35mm camera and her musical wristwatch. The brand is Loris. It had a green umbrella on its face and a green band. It plays the tune, "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." If you have any information at all about the murder of Tammy Zywicki, you can submit tips to the FBI or anonymously, and I will link that information in the description of this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Cardinal Crimes. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and sharing this episode with others. You can find us on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram with the handle @CardinalCrimes, and you can send us any case suggestions, questions, or topics you would like covered there or to our email, cardinalcrimes@gmail.com. Until next time, friends, take care of each other and take care of yourself. If you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, there's no better place to begin than with Buzzsprout. It's the platform I use, and it makes publishing, promoting, and tracking your episodes so easy, even if you're not tech savvy. Plus, they help you get listed in all the major directories like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. And here's the best part. When you sign up for a paid Buzzsprout plan using my affiliate link, you'll get $20 off, and you'll be supporting the show at the same time. Just head to the description of this episode to find the affiliate link. Now, let's get back to the episode.